Hello, Raw Egg Nationalist. It's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor to be with you.
For the audience out there who may not be familiar with your amazing work just yet, would you mind telling them in your own words what it is that you do and how you got to this point?
Yeah, it's a big question. What is it that I do? Well, I started out as a lurker account on right-wing Twitter, and I got behind this new movement called Raw Egg Nationalism, which is about, well, it's in the name really, raw eggs and nationalism, as opposed to what I like to call soy globalism, which is the current paradigm. Frankenfoods, phytoestrogens, anything unhealthy, processed, unnatural food, in combination with a globalist political stance. And raw egg nationalism really is a reaction against that. It's a return to the foods that our ancestors ate, that made us what we are, and also to a politics of nationalism as a means of countering the globalists. So this movement started off on Twitter 2 years ago ish, and I got behind it. And one day I decided a good way to promote the movement would be to write a cookbook. So that's what I did. I made a cookbook, Raw Egg Nationalism in Theory and Practice, which I initially just released as a free ebook. And yeah, I'll come on to that in a minute. That's the hardcover. That's when I really started to have a bit of success. So in the beginning, I just released a free ebook, and tens of thousands of people downloaded it. They loved it. It was a combination of a cookbook and a political manifesto. So it lays out some of the doctrine of raw egg nationalism, as well as providing some delicious egg-based recipes. I then made a paperback version of it on Amazon, and I've never looked back. I've released 5 books on Amazon. And then I decided to make the cookbook into the book it should have been. So the book that you just held up is the hardcover version, which is available from Antelope Hill Publishers. And it's a glossy coffee table version of the original book, updated with more recipes, more raw egg nationalism law and info. And so that's, I mean, my Twitter account had really started to take off by that point. Then I decided to launch a magazine called Man's World, which is the latest issue of which, issue number 6, is about to drop. And I've also released a hardcover annual, like a sort of almost like a classic Playboy annual of the best material from the first 4 issues. That was the 2021 annual. And there'll be a 2022 annual coming as well later in the year. So it's I've got my fingers in a lot of pies at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, like, of all of the content that I've consumed of yours, it's all amazing. It's really great stuff. And I think you take a very thoughtful approach to some of these things that, and really like put a stake in the ground on certain ideas and topics that I think a lot of people are hesitant to talk about or don't have a good understanding of. So like, just the idea of raw nationalism sort of has so much packed in to such a tight sort of phrase, a word, and a specific term that I think it's, the more that you get into it, the more that the more you understand the power of this whole idea. It's amazing.
Well, it's a simple idea, but it's a very powerful one. As you say, controlling what goes into your body is really, and by that I mean food, is really the first step on the road to real autonomy. I mean, the kind of diets that people eat today, the kind of diets that are foisted on people, are so incredibly unhealthy. And it's not a wonder that people are depressed, isolated, and lonely, don't really feel that they have any power because they're shoveling junk into their mouths. They're shoveling the kind of foods that they just shouldn't be eating, processed foods, these sort of industrial Frankenfoods, foods loaded with GMO and seed oils and vegetable oils and sugar. And actually, if you want to change your life, that's one of the best things that you can do today, is to take control of your diet, reject the kind of food that you're being offered, and return to the nourishing foods and the nourishing traditions of the past. And so much can come out of just that one decision to take control of your food. You can transform your life. I mean, people contact me all the time on Twitter, send me messages and tweet at me to say, this has changed my life. So I really believe in it.
I do as well. I'm a raw egg slonker myself. It's honestly, like, it sounds crazy to people who haven't experienced it, but after drinking down 6 eggs, it's like an instant energy burst in a way that you don't even get from a good cup of coffee, at least in my experience. And what's interesting to me about this whole idea is just the stigma around a food like as simple as an egg. You can go eat an apple off a tree and everyone says, oh, great, straight from the source. If you crack an egg into a glass straight from the chicken, people are going to think you're crazy. They think like that's a disease trap, that, you're opening up the world of, you're going to get salmonella and you're going to get sick and you could die and all this crazy fear. But there's not that same public awareness about the diets that you've mentioned, if you want to call it the globalist soy diet. And maybe I'd love to talk more about that, sort of like how national politics and dieting are interrelated in a way that I think few people think of. But nobody talks about the disease that comes from seed oils and or at least, widely in the mainstream public. Of course, in this corner of Twitter, people are, but widely out in the world, people would assume that eating like a granola bar is going to be healthier than a raw egg.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, it's been a long road to get here. I mean, it's taken, let's say, 75 years to get to the point where actually people are distrustful. People are almost instinctually distrustful of the foods that have sustained human beings since the dawn of time. I mean, to think that good quality red meat is dangerous, it's insane. Or something like milk, raw milk. People you might as well be offering people a glass of a glass of glyphosate or something, or a glass of engine oil. People have this sort of natural or conditioned response where they think that it's dangerous, that it's so dangerous, in fact, that it might even kill them. It's crazy. But it's taken a while, but we now are at that point where actually everything people know or think they know about nutrition needs to be turned on its head.
Yeah, and I would love to just kind of take people through sort of the system that we have for regulating food, right? You look at the FDA and it gets vilified a lot by people in this sort of world, because you look at what they allow and what they don't allow, and what they put warning labels on versus what they don't put warning labels on. But on the other hand, you mentioned it's taken 75 years. It's sort of one of those pendulum swinging things where, it's probably a good thing that there's a regulatory agency in place for our food, and there's benefits to it. And there was a reaction that caused the creation of the FDA, right? You have like the Upton Sinclair, how the other half lives, all that kind of stuff. Very important.
The jungle.
Yes, the jungle, exactly. Yes. But now the pendulum is sort of swung back in a way where, there's been special interest groups, call it whatever you want, if it's like the sugar industry or, many such cases of different examples where, they've lobbied for their foods to be approved, and sort of just a natural a flaw in this kind of system where, like eventually we end up in this place where we're at today, where the most basic foods that people have relied on for thousands and thousands of years are vilified compared to, where we're at, what's being recommended to people.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. I was reading somewhere the other day about GMO, about the extent to which there are already GMO ingredients in foods that people eat, especially in America. I mean, I think America really is a good example of the system, of everything that's wrong with the system, that's kind of been taken to its extremes. That's where the all of the worst excesses of the industrial system, I think, have manifested themselves because it's the most prosperous nation on earth, the most technologically advanced. But yeah, I think something like 7 out of 10 processed foods on the shelves in the US now have at least one GMO ingredient in them.
Wow.
And they don't, and the thing is as well that there are regulations about labeling that say that you have to label, you have to say that there's GMO in your product, but there are ways to get around it. There are very easy ways to get around it. And so actually the vast majority of products that have GMO in them don't say anything, or if they do, then it's so out of the way that you'd never see it unless you were poring over the labels with a microscope, with a microscope. So it's I mean, I do agree with you that there does need to be. I do think that food does need to be regulated, especially when profit is involved, because you inevitably get people who cut corners, people who want to maximize profit at the expense of individuals' health. That's always going to happen. But the way that these big lobbies work is totally counter to that. Totally counter to the good intention that lay behind the creation of the system under what was it Teddy Roosevelt who brought in the FDA? I think it was, wasn't it?
I want to say that's right, but I don't know for sure.
1906, yeah. I think it was something like that, because there was that big scandal during the Spanish-American War about embalmed beef. Do you know about that?
I remember learning about it many years ago, but if you have more details, I'd love to hear from your perspective.
Well, it was just that I think more American soldiers died from eating their beef rations than died in combat against the Spanish in the Spanish-American Civil War. So they were given tinned beef, and it was of such an appalling quality that it came to be known as embalmed beef. I mean, I think it quite literally was embalmed.
Wow.
It wasn't fit for human consumption anyway. That was a big scandal. And I think that was 1898. And then I'm sure there was other stuff as well, including The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which is a very, very graphic depiction of just how awful the meatpacking industry in Chicago was at the turn of the 20th century. So yeah, I mean, regulation obviously I think is needed, but when you get to a point where where it's actually illegal to sell raw milk, and it's illegal to do things like, if you have a small farm, it's illegal to slaughter your own animals humanely. I mean, it's the priorities. If you look at the system in general, you can see that it's not designed for the benefit of the little man. It's designed for the benefit of Cargill and Tyson Foods and all of these huge companies that are already far, far too powerful than they should be, and are only becoming more powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's such a unique time as well, when we look at what's happened over the past few years with the pandemic and everyone focusing on health, and you're sort of seeing these same institutions respond to a disease outbreak. And you're seeing sort of these similarities between what's recommended versus what's profitable, right? And I'd love to get your thoughts on, just generally, like, how much do you think profit and profit motives have to do with the food recommendations and with the regular everyday diets of Americans these days?
I think that they're inextricable. I think that these lobbies, the sugar lobby, the anti-saturated fat lobby in particular as well. I mean, there's a long story to be told about how cholesterol and saturated, i.e. animal fats, came to be vilified. That is all about corporate interest. That is all about transforming what was at one point a worthless product, i.e. seed and vegetable oils, which were used, if they were used at all, as industrial lubricants and solvents. I mean, in the space of 100 years, these waste products that were just, like corn oil, for instance. Corn oil was just a byproduct at one point of the production of corn, and it went from being an industrial lubricant to being a principal component of most people's diets. Same with soy oil, canola, rapeseed, whatever you want to call it, all these other, margarine. They've it's incredible that foods that once upon a time people would have just put in an engine or on a machine are now marketed as the healthy option, and that is all to do with money. That is all to do with selective science. I mean, one of the key figures. Well, there are two. I think there are two key figures in the transformation from animal fats being recommended to seed and vegetable oils being recommended. One of them is President Eisenhower, who had a heart attack famously, and that was blamed on his cholesterol. And that was at the same time as this chap called Ansel Keys was promoting some very, very spurious, very selective science about the relationship between saturated fat consumption and heart attacks. He designed the K ration during World War II. That was his big claim to fame. And he wasn't a nutritionist. I mean, he marketed himself as a nutritionist, but I don't think he was. I don't think he had any sort of real formal qualifications. Anyway, he did this 7 countries study where he very selectively chose data that showed a clear correlation between saturated fat consumption and incidence of heart disease, and that became the basis of the whole anti-saturated fat movement, which has taken over. And I mean, people are starting to learn about this now, of course, but I think what you have to understand is that all of the dreadful negative health trends, or large part of the dreadful negative health trends that we've seen over the past 50, 75 years have been as a result of this. I mean, it has wreaked untold damage. But one of the things that's interesting on the subject of sort of developing trends in food is the way that big companies like Cargill and Tyson Foods are now pivoting from being meat companies, where they dominate meat, pigs, beef, whatever, through vertical integration, where they own every single node in the production chain, from the rearing of animals to slaughtering, distribution, all that kind of stuff. These big companies now are rebranding themselves as protein companies. So they're not meat manufacturers anymore, they're protein companies. And that is in advance of, or that is as part of the agenda to move people towards alternative protein sources, like bug protein,
yes,
lab grown meat, all that kind of stuff. So they're getting ahead of the curve with all of that and what they're doing. And of course, there's a huge profit to be had in all of these products because they can be patented.
Yes.
You can't patent a cow unless it's a genetically modified cow, which I'm sure at some point, I mean, I saw an article the other day about cows that are being genetically modified to produce less methane.
Wow.
Because cow farts and cow burps are, this existential threat to the planet. Anyway, but these lab grown meats and are all patentable. And that's why these big companies are interested in them. So it doesn't matter to them so much whether they're selling meat or cricket protein. It just matters that they're in control and that they're making the money. So, I mean, it's not a case, they don't care whether it's more healthy to eat grass-fed beef or even grain-fed beef than crickets. They just want the money. And that is what you're going to see. You're going to see that if this global agenda to more or less eliminate animal-based products from our diets goes ahead, the same companies that dominated the animal-based market will be dominating the alternative market as well. Be in no doubt about that. And in fact, actually, the corporate control of the food industry of our diets will only increase.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think just the idea, the term raw egg nationalism is so important, because it hits on a few things. You know, for one, it's something as simple as an egg, but it's looking at sort of the global food market, and these things that you're talking about, these synthetic meats or protein sources, are the kinds of things that you see talked about by the World Economic Forum. And, you know, people can go down that whole rabbit hole as far as, you know, like their influence over global leaders and things like that. And so it's this question of, you know, non-government organizations and their influence on something as essential as our food supply, and where that food's coming from, the profit behind that food, and the slander that goes against things that are not profitable for them, like the existing, you know, I've read that the existing sort of like ground beef industry in the United States is just an old industry. It's been commoditized to the point where it's very inexpensive. Same thing with, like, you know, you can have chickens in your backyard that give you all the eggs that you need. That's simply not profitable. So you can sort of expect to get that slander from these entities, because it's not going to be in their best interest for you to do the simple, natural, local method of getting your food. Yes, it's really quite frightening. And that's why I think, again, you know, I appreciate the work that you do here, because just leading with that term, raw egg nationalism, gets you to think about your food source, how it relates to, and trying to make it as local as possible. Because I'd love for you to touch on that as well. With people think about raw eggs, they think, oh, that's nasty, but they've probably never tried a farm raised egg that's, you know, the chickens are happy and fed with good food. Could you touch on, maybe, I know you've probably done this 1,000 times, but you're so good at it. I would love to talk about some of these common myths and debunk some of these myths around raw eggs and the food, you know. It'd be awesome.
Well, it's, I mean, one of the central planks, I suppose, of raw egg nationalism is the recognition that you are what you eat eats. You know,
it's bioaccumulation in the food chain. It's normal.
So you have an interest. If you want to be healthy, I mean, there's a whole ethical side to it too. I mean, factory farming of animals is disgusting, and the way that chickens are treated in particular is terrible, and pigs as well. I mean, pigs are intelligent creatures, and you know, but if you want to be healthy, then you have an interest in eating food you have an interest in eating animals that have lived a good life and been fed properly according to their actual needs, according to their wild diets or their accustomed diets, whatever you want to call it. But yes, I mean, some people might be accustomed to buying eggs, free range eggs or organic eggs or whatever, because they've thought about the ethical consequences of or the ethical aspect of consuming foods. But most people don't really know very much about why it's better for you to eat food that, you know, as I say, has or to eat animals that have been treated properly and fed well. I mean, if you go to, I get all of my eggs from a local farm that's a couple of miles down the road, and I walk in, and there are the chickens. They're either in the farmyard or they're out. You know, you can see them out on the pasture, and they're happy and healthy. And I go in the farm shop and buy fresh eggs each, well, not every day, but every couple of days I buy a big, you know, buy in bulk, and that's how it should be, really. I mean, if you've got the space for your own chickens, then that's the mother load, really. You know, to be able to produce your own eggs at home, to know exactly what your chickens are eating, and you know, that they're living the kind of lives that they should be living, that they're getting out in the sun, because all of these things have an effect on the nutritional content of the egg. You know, I mean, even an egg that is produced under bad conditions is very nutritious. There's no doubt about that. But an egg that is produced by a happy chicken that's eating the right food will be so much more nutritious. Will be, you know, the ratios of fats will be perfect. You know, you'll have the right kind of ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. The micronutrient content will be higher. Because I mean, people don't realize just how much of a superfood an egg is. I mean, it's like a perfect balance of protein, fats, all sorts of micronutrients, and all sorts of compounds that actually have these the incredible effects that actually scientists are only just waking up to now. There's a very interesting paper called The Golden Egg, and it's just about everything that scientists know about eggs and about the effects of all of the different compounds in eggs. And at one point, it's the author says, in truth, actually, we don't know. There are all of these compounds, and we don't actually know what they do, but they look like they have, some very, very promising effects, and we need to do some more research into them. And one of the compounds that is very, very important, certainly to raw egg nationalism, is cholesterol, which has been probably one of the most demonized. Yeah, I think it is probably one of the most demonized substances, maybe apart from tobacco or something like that, in the modern Western system of health and medicine. Cholesterol might as well be the devil. And that is, well, we're now coming to see just how wrong that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I feel like this is one of those things where people think too hard about it. I know growing up, I've seen, it was like every other year, you'd see different articles about eggs. Eggs are great for you. Eggs are horrible for you. Eggs are great for you. It was like a constant back and forth about whether or not eggs are even good for you. And it's like one of those things where if you take a step back and think less and just think this egg is the life force of an entire chicken. This chicken could go on to live a whole life. Think less about it and realize that, of course, it's like a superfood. Same thing with raw milk, right? Like, have you seen how a calf grows into a cow and how quickly that happens and how much mass they put on? And you know what I mean? Like, to build that much muscle and everything. It's like, think less about that and just realize, it's like you drink the raw milk, you're probably going to get something of the same effect, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing, yes, as you say, look at the purpose of the substance. I mean, you look at an egg. What is an egg? An egg is life, or is the potential for life.
Yeah.
And so everything that's contained in that egg is going to be used to produce a new life form. And cholesterol is a very, very important part of that. And there have been all sorts of studies now to substantiate some of the claims of, for instance, Vince Gironda, who is the patron saint of raw egg nationalism. He's my avatar, the ascended Gironda. He was a bodybuilding maverick in the 1950s, 60s, and he had these very, very what were then, and probably even still now, left field theories about nutrition, training. And kind of foremost among these left field theories was his advocacy of fat-based diets on the basis largely of scientific reading that he had done about people like the Inuits, and also, I think, about the Native Americans, about their diet, the Plains Americans, I mean, in particular, their buffalo and meat heavy diet, where it was just meat and fat. And also his advocacy of consumption of massive quantities of raw eggs. So that's kind of where the raw egg part of the raw egg nationalism comes from, or this is the kind of theoretical side of it. So he had this diet called the 36 eggs a day diet, or the hormone precursor diet, which was his natural alternative basically to a cycle of steroids, to a cycle of something like Dianabol, for instance, which was the kind of main steroid hormone, the main steroid substance that was being used in the 1950s and 60s, because he was an advocate of natural training. He was not a fan of steroids. So his theory, based on reading that he had done, was that consumption of large quantities of eggs, because of the cholesterol content, would be massively anabolic. Now, in recent years, in the last 15, 20 years, and there have been scientific studies of cholesterol intake and its relationship with muscle growth. There's a chap called Steve Reichman, who I talk about in my books, who's done, I think, 3 or 4 studies, and there have been other studies that corroborate his studies, on the relationship between cholesterol consumption and muscle growth. And he showed that there is a closer correlation between cholesterol consumption and lean muscle gain than there is between protein consumption and lean muscle gain.
Wow.
So we're starting to get this idea that actually, the kind of bro science is, you've got to eat protein. You've got to eat protein, chicken and rice, chicken and rice, chicken and rice. But actually, chicken is very, very lean with very, very little cholesterol in it. You might be able to get away with the chicken and rice diet if you're injecting yourself with testosterone or a steroid hormone. But actually, if you're a natty, then you really do need cholesterol. Cholesterol is an anabolic hormone. And to go back to the egg, then it's full of cholesterol for a reason, because it stimulates growth, because it's necessary for growth. It's necessary for expansion. And so the analogy, thinking about what a substance does is it's intuitive and it's true, I think. And we need to get back to trusting, I think, our intuitions about the foods that are and aren't healthy for us. That's I think, a central pillar of what I'm advocating too.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And you just look at Geronda, look at your profile photo there, and like the results speak for themselves to some degree, right? You don't have to overcomplicate it. Look at what people, on a vegetable oil processed food diet look like, and then look at Geronda. It's like, again, like normally I would advocate always like critical thinking, more thinking. In this case, kind of take a step back and just like, to your point, just use your intuition. What makes sense? 1,000%.
The thing is, there's always this counterexample of people who eat crap food but actually are ripped, and that is the case. I mean, some people you can get away with eating crappy food. Certain people do, and certain, you'd be surprised by the diets of certain people who actually look fantastic. But the truth is that the average person eating that food is going to look like crap. Whereas, if everybody moved to a Geronda style diet, or to at the very least to a diet that's based on real whole foods, then there's no doubt that they would look and feel so much better.
100%. So I want to change gears here a little bit and talk about Man's World and your magazine, and sort of what is and then after that, I'd love to hear, just between all of this stuff that you're working on, sort of like, what is this driving force for you to create this content, to go in this direction and do things that people aren't doing, and talk about things people aren't talking about? So with Man's World, what was the inspiration for this project? I mean, I've loved every issue. I think it's a great collection of minds that you get together for each one. And it's one of those things that I have to commend you for, because many people complain about the media out there in the world and what's available, but few do anything about it. And in this case, you're definitely doing something about it, and you're creating the kind of content that people want. What inspired this project, and for you to put in all this energy and work into doing it?
Thank you. Well, so when I was writing my second book, 3 Lives of Golden Age Bodybuilders, which is an account of the lives of three Golden Age bodybuilders: Reg Park, Chuck Sipes, Chet Yorton. I was writing about, or researching about, Reg Park, who was Arnold Schwarzenegger's mentor in the 60s. And I found out that he had a short-lived journal that was called the Reg Park Journal, and then it became Man's World Journal. And I just thought, Man's World's a cool name for a magazine that would, And so that thought was sort of in my head. And then I don't know why exactly, but I was thinking about men's magazines and the decline of Playboy, I think, and how awful Playboy is now, and how quickly that's happened too. Because you can read an issue of Playboy from, say, 2010 or 2012 even, and it's still really good. And there's that old joke about reading Playboy for the articles, but it's true. Like it's true, I mean, it's beautiful women in there and stuff, but the content was seriously good. They used to have amazing writers write for them, all the time, and it was actually a magazine that was worth sitting down and reading. It was a pleasure to read. And I just thought, well, when was the last time I read a good magazine? Wouldn't that be a good forum for all these various talents that exist on our side of Twitter? Because lots of people have Substacks now where they do essays and stuff, and they might do an interesting thread on Twitter about some historical event or whatever. But I just thought it would be nice to be able to bring that kind of content together in one place as a showcase, to give it some kind of unifying form and package it in a way that makes it instantly accessible, I think, to a wider audience. So that was what I wanted to do. That was kind of the genesis of it. But when I did the first issue, then I had no experience of design. So I was using this online software to do the magazine and stuff, and it was all much more laborious than it needed to be. But I managed to do it, and each issue has just got better and better in terms of the aesthetics and the formatting and all that kind of stuff. But the content was always, I think, was great from the start. But I've been working on the aesthetics and the design, learning as I go along. Now I use proper design software for it. But we're on issue 6 now, which is coming out next weekend.
Excellent.
And it promises to be as stacked as issue 5 was so stacked. I thought to myself, I'm never going to top this. Maybe I should just give up while I'm ahead. But somehow issue 6 has managed to be just as stacked, if not more. So it's really going to be something when it drops.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff. Like the collection that you have in each of content information in each issue is it's a lot, like I think even for like a regular Twitter reader, it's a lot of great stuff, a lot of amazing stories and interesting articles. And I hope you have a team working with you on this stuff, because it looks like,
no, it's just me.
That's
me.
Unbelievable. Like that's such a labor, man. Like that's a lot of work,
it's a labor of love.
Clearly you can tell it's got the right guidance on every page, which it's if that's all you, like, incredible, man. I could not commend you enough for that. What is there? Do you have aspirations for taking it physical?
So I've already released an annual, which I relaced last year.
Oh yes, the 2021 annual. Yes.
Yeah, 2021 annual. And I will do another one this year. It would be amazing to have an actual physical magazine on the shelves. I don't. I would need backing to do that. But
yeah.
one of the problems is copyright and stuff. So I use a lot of stock images and copyright free images. There are all sorts of that would be a big cost if I wanted to use, say, like a real picture of from a Disney film or something, or a still from a movie or something. So I've had to be creative to get around that kind of stuff. And then you've got printing and distribution. I mean, it would need, I think, significant financial backing, certainly for the first few issues. I think people would definitely buy it, because a lot of people have bought the annual and a lot of people have bought my other stuff, and tens of that. I think a couple of maybe 250,000 people have read the magazine now.
Wow, that's incredible.
All of the issues. So, I think there's obviously a market for it.
Definitely. I recommend anyone listening to this, like, look at the state of men's magazines today. Look at, you don't even have to go to Playboy. You can look at Men's Health. Used to be a good men's magazine that you'd buy at GNC or something like that. It's awful now. There's nothing in there of value to you. And so, yes, I think this is just one of those natural holes in the marketplace, which, it seems like one of these things where it's almost like a thought crime these days to even develop products aimed at men and men exclusively. Which, like, have you had any blowback or resistance, or just, any sort of, have there been criticisms in that vein that's like, why even make a product just for men these days?
Yeah. I mean, the main criticism, and I knew this would come, would be that it's somehow homoerotic. Like it's gay. It's gay to it's gay to have a magazine that's about men's interests. You know, I'm obviously some kind of crypto homosexual, and you know, when I write it, when I write about like bodybuilders and stuff, of course, that's homoerotic and that kind of stuff. But this is something I've talked about. Is the way in which that slur in particular, I think, is used to, or is one of many ways that they actually make it very, very difficult, or make it harder for men to associate with one another. You know, it's like, even you see these articles. I mean, I did a tweet the other day about, or an Instagram post about an article that was saying that it's normal for men in normal male friendships to hug and kiss each other and hold hands and stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know what you're trying to say there. I think that they're afraid of traditional male forms of association. I think that they're afraid for men to form real bonds of friendship, because, you know, I mean, that male friendship has been, I think, at the root of so much of the greatness of Western civilization.
Yes,
there's so much power. There's so much power there. There's so much that a determined band of men who are loyal to one another and, you know, acting together in the service of some particular cause can do. When you look at a group like the conquistadors, you know, you can 150 very, very determined Spanish men under the command of a capable leader can you know, overturn, can destroy an entire empire and create a totally new order. And I think that that's a very, very scary prospect. I think that they would prefer you to be isolated, looking at porn, eating crappy food, watching somebody else play sport on the television.
Yeah,
that's what they want.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what's most profitable for them, right? For you to be sick, for you to be entertained. You know, these things are all just interconnected profit motives. But you know, just to take a step back, you know, about like what, you know, a group of men, you know, committed to the same cause with loyalty can do. You know, I feel like the natural complaint for that is like, oh, well, can't women be involved? You know, what about different types of people, or people of different, whatever gender on the spectrum they want to choose? What are your what would be your response to that?
I think it's a complicated question. I mean, I think relations between the sexes are very, very complicated, and I think one of the things that actually has made relations between the sexes more complicated is the absence of dedicated spaces for men and women, for men to be men and women to be women. You know, it's like you go to the gym and it's 50-50 male and female, and now you've got women making videos about how men are looking at their asses when they're doing squats. And it's, I mean, one of the things that it does is it's totally got rid of any sense of mystery between the sexes. And I think that mystery is very, very important. I think that we're a culture that insists on everything being explicit and everything being stated, and I think that there's actually something very, very valuable in mystery and leaving things unsaid, and which we've lost, and that is I think one of the problems with these spaces, and also workspaces, I think, as well. You know, like maybe men and women shouldn't work together in the same spaces. I mean, I don't know that it makes life better for men and women. I don't think it makes men and women respect each other more or get on better. And so I think, well, there's that, but then there's also, for instance, let's say, for instance, the military, you know, where you have the lowering of standards to allow female recruits. I mean, maybe there are just jobs that women aren't very good at, and one of them possibly is being an elite fighter, is being a warrior. I mean, you might get women at the furthest end of the spectrum, you know, like the most aggressive, most physically fit women, who might be able possibly to fit into a Marine regiment or a Rangers regiment or the SAS or the Marines in Britain or whatever, but it's unlikely. And in fact, actually, all experience thus far has shown that even when you get the toughest, fittest women, you still have to lower standards. So there's that as well. I mean, it's a complicated problem. But I don't understand. Well, we have it drilled into us, this instinctive revulsion for inequality in any form, and actually I think that we need to ask instead whether actually inequality has its uses, which it very obviously does. I mean, we rely on inequality in all sorts of different ways in our lives to make things function. You know, I mean, you don't just have anybody running a nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have the most intelligent people running the power plant, and in the same way with an army, what you want is the most aggressive, dedicated, fittest, and it just so happens that more or less all of them are going to be men. So why change it? I mean, it's the victory of ideology over reality, over the brute facts of existence, you might call them.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, this is certainly hot water to tread into these days, right? Like even talking about anything besides pure equality is like controversial on its own. And so, you know, I've thought about this quite a bit as well, because it is a complicated subject. You know, you look at what's happening right now in the United States with, you know, transgender athletes competing against women, right? Or born women, let's say. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like how do we actually thread this needle? And to your point, you know, talking about equality and inequality, I've thought about it more and realized, you know, it's things maybe should be unequal leaning towards women, you know, which I feel like is almost like was the reality for a while. Like if you were in gym class in the 50s, you'd have a segregated men's and women's gym area, things like that, right? The purpose, I think, not so much being to keep the gender separated or to create a hierarchy of men are better than women, but it's more of like, you know, and you look at the situation of just in a gym today, women being harassed by men while they're trying to work out. They should deserve their own space. They should have their own place. You know, we're both men. I think we can both speak for men in the sense of some men are disgusting and women should have their own spot. And the way that I've been thinking of it as well is like, you know, if you know, maybe this can be a one-way street where like if you know, women can have access to the men's area, but men cannot access the women's area. Actually give women additional privilege. Like this idea of equality could actually be a downgrade for women in some of these regards, in some of these places like high school athletics, where, you know, you have a biologically born male entering into a female arena, and then you're seeing the results of that versus, you know, hey, if a woman qualifies for a man's sport, if a WNBA player can play in the NBA, more power to them. But should an NBA player go play in the WNBA? I don't think that'd be fair. You know, so if anything, you know, it sort of turns this idea of like a patriarchy on its head. It's like we should glorify women. We should glorify their special talents, their abilities that men don't have. Men cannot bring life into this world. One of the most sacred, probably the most sacred thing you could ever imagine or talk about. That should be elevated. That should be an amazing privilege that we all rally around, as opposed to forcing women to compete with men in the workplace and create this levelized hierarchy or this levelized system that maybe is not optimal for anybody. But
it's very strange. It's very strange, this desire almost to create a unigender, to eliminate the differences between genders. It's a strange impulse.
I feel like it's anti-life. It's anti-civilization in a way where it doesn't promote, you know, I think that mystery that you described earlier, like that's like the polarization that builds attraction. And to take that away, and to promote this unigender sort of way of living, I think it's almost anti-civilization in the sense that we can look at our birth rates and we can see that birth rates are below replacement rates. Shouldn't it be the government's job to plan for the demographic future of the nation? Shouldn't it be up to them to look at the replacement rate and be like, hey, we don't have enough people to fill the jobs today. Why would that be the case, you know, in another 20 years? But we're not getting that kind of that thought. It's going the other way.
Of course, what they do is they rely on cheap immigrant labor and cheap and immigrant immigration to raise birth rates. I mean, if you look at the birth rates in places like Germany, then they're positive, but that's only because of mass migration.
Yeah,
and that will be the same across the West. But I mean, going back to the thing about men and women, it's and transgender athletes in sports, then the thing is something like, I mean, the Leah Thomas swimming example has been, occupying the headlines now for some time. I mean, that's an egregious, that's a very bad example of just how unfair it can be. But in a case like that, then you're not talking about physical safety. I mean, it must be incredibly upsetting to be a female athlete. You've trained your entire life to be your entire adult life to be a swimmer, and then a man comes along, basically somebody who has enjoyed all the benefits of growing up as a male, increased bone density, muscle mass, all these kinds of things. Yeah, and then just takes a hormone blocker, which has some effects, but doesn't in any way negate all the advantages that he has enjoyed growing up a biological male, and then absolutely whips you. And we are obviously, this is going to become a much more pervasive problem, and at some point probably all female world records will be held by men. We're going to see the end of female sports. But I think there's another. It gets even more sinister when you have things like combat sports, when you have MMA, for instance.
Absolutely.
and you have a biological man beating the shit out of a woman. And I do think that at some point we're going to see some really, I mean, we have seen some serious beatdowns, but we'll probably see worse. I think we'll see deaths, and maybe that will make people wake up. Maybe it won't. I mean, it's amazing the degree to which people are still refusing to believe the evidence of their eyes.
Yeah.
But that's true in so many respects about our kind of current cultural civilizational moment. I think that people have, as I was saying with food, people don't trust the evidence of their eyes anymore, or their intuitions. They're afraid to.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so amazing, again, about this idea of right nationalism, just to tie it all back together. It's this idea of like personal sovereignty, and making the individual choices that you need to make, like go get your eggs from a farmer's market. You're promoting, not only you're voting with your dollars, and you're, voting with your actions by deciding to go local and, invest in the industries that, and the businesses that, you really believe in.
Community.
Right? Yeah, the local community, as opposed to a global, these huge multi-billion-dollar companies selling you fake or diluted meat products. Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's amazing that the mainstream, the ethical choice now is to go with big corporations, So if we stay on the subject of eggs, then have you heard of this new company called Just Egg? Have you heard of?
Yeah, I looked at the ingredients label, and there's no eggs.
Mung bean protein, and so for the listeners, it's a synthetic egg alternative, like oat milk is a synthetic milk alternative.
Impossible meat.
It's an egg in a bottle. An egg. It's an egg. You pour it out, and you can make scrambled eggs or an omelette or whatever. But this is all patented technology. It's made by a big corporation. Like, how is that better? How is that better for anybody than going to your local farm and buying an egg from a hen that's happily scratching around the farmyard, lives a nice life? I mean, it is amazing that people have, I suppose, just been indoctrinated really to think that actually that could be, that it's an obvious choice, that obviously you plump for the corporation somehow, you plump for the newfangled product that you're told is better for some reason, without exercising your own judgment. It's very strange, but it's I mean, I think it's part of a broader trend, I think, where people derive their identities, people derive their sense of self and self-worth from the corporate products that they buy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 100%. They believe the marketing more than their own intuition, which I think is reversing that trend is probably it's really where it's at, is getting everyone individually to think sort of with their own intuition rather than just buying marketing, like, oh, I can't believe it's not butter. It must be healthier than butter. Like, just because it says on the label doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah. But that's it seems to be quite an uphill battle, actually, for people to divorce themselves from this sort of corporate matrix, because it's everything.
Yeah.
It's every aspect of people's lives now is sort of dictated by corporate interests.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky because I live in the countryside and I have very ready access to good local produce. I can go down to the local farmer. I can get raw milk, really nice eggs, pork that they've fed on their raw milk, stuff like that. Organic veg if I want it, all that kind of organic fruit, all that kind of stuff, and locally made handicrafts and things. But if you live in a city, if you live in a food desert, as they call it, and I think a lot of food cities really sort of are food deserts, then it's much harder. So I feel for people who have to make a real effort to get healthy food, but it's worth it. And only if people start to demand real food will the culture change. Only if we stop buying these ridiculous products, only if we stop buying food that is made by these or produced by these huge corporate entities, will the broader culture change.
Yeah, 100%. And just to add to that, you mentioned you're lucky you live in the countryside. I do not live in the countryside. I live smack in the middle of Los Angeles. And but to give everyone an idea, this is not just because you live in a city in the United States doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for you to get farm fresh food. I actually in about an hour from now, I'm going to be going to a meeting spot where there's so many people in Los Angeles ordering food from a natural amazing farm in Pennsylvania that you can get your raw eggs, or you can get your eggs, you can get your raw milk, you can get a million different, you can get bone broth, a million different products from these farms delivered, and everyone sort of splits the cost of a refrigerated box truck to drive out here, and then everyone unloads the boxes, gets their food straight from the farm, and that happens every 2 weeks. So it's possible, and people are working in this direction, so much so that I was amazed that there were this many people in my region, my area of Los Angeles, that this system already existed and I could just be a part of it. So you don't have to live in the countryside either to vote with your dollars and your actions to get this food.
Well, that's really encouraging. I mean, I would encourage anybody to get involved with that kind of thing, or to try and organize it if they can. Yeah. That's fantastic.
I implore people to take action, just like you, Raw Egg Nationalist. You've done so much for this idea. I have to say, I wouldn't be getting my food from a farm if I didn't start down this road because of the content that you've produced. So I have endless gratitude for you for that. And I'm sure that's the case for thousands, soon to be millions of other people around the world. So thank you so much. I want to be sensitive with your time. I know we're at the hour, but do you have any final words or advice or anything you want to leave with the audience? I've really appreciated this conversation. I think, any words of wisdom would be fantastic.
It's been great. Thank you, Patrick. It's been a real privilege, and we've had a really good talk. Actually, we've got. I think there's much more that we could talk about. So we need to do this again, I think.
Yes, I would love to.
But what would I say? I would say start with the small things, and the big things will look after themselves. So don't make small changes, and that includes not only your diet but also fitness. If you're unhealthy, if you're not exercising, just start to do small things, and that can really be the beginning of a total transformation of your life. And that's something that people aren't told. People are told now that it's too difficult. You see this again and again in these sort of anti-diet positivity sort of posts that you see on Instagram. It's too much. Diet culture is evil, and it's too much, and people can't people can't really change their lives. People don't have willpower, but you can. You just need to start small. You need to be humble. Take each day as it comes, and the successes will accrue over time.
I agree 100%. Love that. That's amazing. Before we wrap up, is there anywhere you'd like to direct people? Where can people find you on the internet and all your books and all your amazing content?
So my Twitter account is Raw Egg Nationalist, which is @babygravy9, which is a slightly unfortunate name, but that was the name that my Lurker account had in the beginning. And if you want, the easiest place to go for all of my content is to go to my link page. So I had a link tree, but they took it down for some reason. They cut that
down. Yeah,
they did. So I've got a link.bio page. So if you go to lnk.bio/Raw Egg Nationalist, that will have links to all of my books, my Amazon books, my hardcover books with Antelope Hill, all my podcast appearances, and also all of the links to the magazine, which is free. Magazine is free. All 6 issues and all future issues will be on there as well. So go to lnk.bio/Raw Egg Nationalist.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to seeing your next whatever else you do. It's going to be awesome, I'm sure.
Thanks, Patrick.